Hello and welcome to Nerdarchy for Nerds by Nerds. I'm Nerdicus Dave, and today I am joined by Andrew Strother. Am I saying that correctly? I should have asked you beforehand.
Close, Strother, but it's all good.
From Roll for Persuasion, a podcast. You also do marketing for Dwarven Forge as well. Exciting stuff, man. Podcasting and working in the industry, living the dream.
Yeah, kind of. And podcasting just launched an actual play show on Twitch, all sorts of other different things. That's the thing about this industry is like once you get in there, like hundreds of different roads you can go down, and suddenly you find yourself way too busy. And I think I'm firmly in the way too busy camp right now.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking about this a little bit, but it's like we create a lot of content, and that is like sometimes it's like the least thing you do as far as time consumption, right? The actual creating of the content. And then it's like all the editing afterwards. And then like you have all these social medias you now have to interact on.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say it's true. Like I was trying for a bit to stream my show because Roll for Persuasion, I interview other kind of what we're doing now. Essentially, I just have kind of relaxed, laid back conversations with other creatives and kind of gaming and in the nerdy world. And I felt a lot of pressure at the end of last year. Like everyone's on Twitch. You need to put your show on Twitch. So I was like, okay, I'm going to start streaming these interviews on Twitch. And that like killed my productivity and like my enjoyment of what I was doing. And purely because it just added so many of those like back end, like editing and promotion and whatever. And so like, it's less it's less of what we're doing right now that can be exhausting. It's all the stuff behind the scenes that people don't see that you have to do to get the content out that can really like, weigh your energy down.
Yeah, like early on when Twitch came out, we had that internal discussion. Some of us wanted to do it, some of us didn't. We kind of like did a little bit of a foray into it, and like some of us were like crunching the numbers, but you can do this and make that. And I'm like, yeah, but I firmly landed on, do I want to do the first 5 years of YouTube all over again? And my response was, fuck no. and you know what? Like having done a live play show collab with Saver Dice here on YouTube, we did bounce back and forth between Twitch and YouTube. And what we found was like your audiences don't cross over. So, so they're not going to follow you there more than likely. And you can gain new audience, but unless you were like a rock star over in the other places, the chances of it just taking right off in the new place, probably not.
Sure. Yeah, you're just adding more work for yourself to try and like do that build. Yeah.
And also too, it's like at the end of the day, you kind of have to decide like what you want to do, what do you want to get out of it. Podcasting, putting content on YouTube, putting content on Twitch. They're all three very different things.
Right.
And, figuring out which ones you actually enjoy doing is part of the key.
Yeah. And there's lots of pressure. I think, well, there's lots of pressure everywhere in life, true statement. But I think like in content creation and maybe even specifically in tabletop, there's like a lot of internalized pressure from you see other people doing XYZ, right? Like you see someone like, oh, they went on Twitch and they're blowing up, or they're doing cool stuff on Instagram. So I should probably be doing that. And it can be very easy to feel like your success hinges on like the venues in which you put your content out or the channels that you go through. And like, I don't know, I'm thinking more and more, it's really just about finding your lane where there's an equal balance of joy for what you're doing and, a level of comfort marketing yourself to like actually find success. Because if you try and spread yourself too thin, like you burn out so fast and then you hate everything and everything's miserable and you're not having fun anymore. So yeah, finding your lane is super important.
I mean, for us, we do YouTube, the website, and create content, like products, and that's way too much. So it adds up quickly. I think it was Warren Buffett kind of said, and I'm very, very, very much paraphrasing, to be successful, you need to be a specialist, not a generalist. Which comes with its own problems. Like, a lot of times the problem with specialists a lot of times is the inability to adapt. But if, because that's where timing comes in, right? For us, YouTube was really good because we were doing something a little bit different when we started. And kind of like speaking to what you're saying about like having to do all these different things, we went out to LA for GM tips with the Team Phoenix and Geek and Sundry, and like being able to go into like the bullpen of Geek and Sundry and the Nerdist and go looking around. Like they wanted to show us what things could look like at scale. And like I kind of got it, but what I really saw was like, wow, there's 6 people doing the job that I'm doing.
Yeah.
It just made me sad.
Yeah, I think it's interesting too, because I think it's thinking about not just like we'll just keep talking about content creation, like not just like the kind of content you want to do, but really like what you're getting out of it. So when I started doing my show, a lot of people were like, oh, so you could go to XY convention, you could be like the official podcast of blank. And I'm like, no. I don't make a podcast because I love podcasting. I enjoy it as like a medium.
Yeah.
It's because I love networking and connecting with people and having genuine interactions with people. I just happen to pick podcasting as the channel I'm going to do that in. And so like knowing the why of what you're doing and not simply like the how or the what, I think is super important too, because I could go do this somewhere else. It wouldn't have to be podcasting. But as long as I know like why I'm doing it, which for me is like connecting with people, telling stories, then I can take that kind of value and apply it to any sort of medium, right?
Were you a fan of podcasts before you became a podcaster?
Not at all. I'm a white dude and I turned 30, and they just give you a podcast when you're a white dude who hits his 30. So it just kind of happened. No, like I listened to Serial, like everybody did when Serial came out, and and that was really kind of it. And even now, I don't listen to a lot of podcasts. What I like about podcasting specifically is it is still kind of one of the few ways to create and distribute content that is still fairly unregulated, meaning like it's a double-edged sword, because there's no good way to do podcast discovery. Apple deciding to put you on their front page is about the only way, but there's no YouTube algorithm to crack. There's no whatever thing. Literally anyone can set up, do one, and start building a presence and sharing a story. So that's what I like about it, is that anyone can still kind of do it. The playing field is still fairly level, with the exception of if you're a celebrity, you can come in and make a hit podcast just based off your face. But anyone kind of has a chance, and most people are open to coming and joining you. It's a very low barrier to entry. So that's what I really kind of appreciate about it as kind of a medium.
That you actually bring up a really good point. And it's something that I try and impart to people when they get started, as a content creator, whether you're on Twitch, you're on YouTube, whatever. At the end of the day, you don't own those platforms. So you really don't have control over what happens, or if they even let you do it anymore, right? It's like releasing without a lease agreement, right? So they can just boot you anytime.
Yeah.
And that's why we've always had a website as well, as kind of like a fallback point, if nothing else. So that, if one day Nerdarchy disappears from YouTube and someone goes, what happened to Nerdarchy? Like they can Google and, there's this whole website where we still exist.
Exactly.
I feel like podcasting has a little bit of that, where, maybe you could be kicked from one of them, but you're not likely to be kicked from all of them. And also, having to transport audio over the internet is way cheaper than video.
Significantly so, yeah.
Yeah, if you had to do it yourself. So you kind of have options.
Yeah.
And just like you, I wasn't into YouTube before we became YouTubers. Like, I had done some blogging, and a buddy of mine is like, you should do D&D for a living. I'm like, you can't do D&D for a living. That's not a thing. And like he had kind of like been my mentor in like all things internet. So I started poking around, and I found some people that had like 30,000 people following them on YouTube for D&D. I was like, oh, this is crazy. You can D&D for a living.
Right. And now more than ever, which is crazy. And I don't know where the ceiling is on, content creation and industry growth. I feel like every month I hear or see someone say like, oh, I want to start making content, but there's so many people out there already. I'm like, dude, do it, make it. Like when I was trying to get into D&D, I watched so many freaking YouTube videos and read so many tutorials. Like there wasn't enough content. So like, I don't know, the options are spreading as it becomes, I don't know if you can even say as it becomes more mainstream, because it's so
Yeah.
mainstream at this point. But whole industries are building up around it, and yeah, anyone can kind of go and make what they want and have a decent chance of making a good go at it.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of like the really big YouTubers have all sprung up over the last like 2 years.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
maybe we're going on 3 now. The last year this time dilation thing's been going on, and I have no perception of time
Right.
anymore.
Like I realized the other day that like a couple weeks ago, I was like, oh, this was the day that Emerald City Comic Con canceled, and I had to cancel like my flights to Seattle and like rechange my whole plans, because that was going to be like the first convention I went to like as a show. And it was like, has it been a year? If it's simultaneously been the longest and the shortest year, I think, of my life, because it feels like it took forever. And then looking back, I'm like, holy cow, where did that time go?
Yeah, no, I totally get that, and part of that is I feel like it's just getting older. Time starts to really play tricks on you. Like, I don't know. If you remember when you were a kid and you went on, you had summer break, and it felt like those 2.5 months lasted forever.
Right.
And now it's like you blink and you miss a season.
Yeah, very true.
So how often are you running your show?
So ideally, and that's always the fun question to ask podcasters. Ideally, it is a weekly show. And that was one of the reasons I stopped doing the Twitch stream, because the Twitch stream was like causing me to miss my published date like every week. I'd gone, I don't know, 60 something episodes without missing a week, and then suddenly, because I was streaming and trying to coordinate people to stream is more difficult than coordinating people just to jump on and do a call. Like I was missing weeks, and it was really frustrating. But I'm back to being weekly. Usually on Monday or Wednesday, a new episode will drop. And yeah, and in between that, like I said, I'm doing an actual play show, and I made that every other week, because I was like, if I try and make another weekly show, I'm gonna kill myself. So I bumped that to every other week. So it's a good cadence as far as like putting content out.
Yeah, it gets to be a lot fast. Like I mean, I do these Monday through Friday, and we have a couple night things that we do, but I mean, this is all I really do, so it's manageable.
Yeah.
Yeah, I couldn't imagine also doing another full-time job on top of this.
That's the trick, because I do a full-time job. I help smaller creators with like their marketing and their web stuff. I do 2 shows. I produce podcasts for several other different creators. I do too much. I do too much. The problem is I enjoy it, and it's all because of like getting to meet and work with cool people. So
Yeah.
when you like meet, a cool person and you vibe well with them, it's hard to say like, no, you know what? I could help you, but I'm not going to. It's like, no, I want to help you. I want to help you do something cool too. And then you look down and you're like, that to-do list is too long.
That is one of the cool things about this industry. I think there's more people like that than not.
Yeah. Who want to kind of like network sideways and be like, oh, you're doing a cool thing, I'm doing a cool thing, let's do it together, and let's grow.
Yeah, not just that too. Like people that are willing to help people that are just getting started and talk to them and give them access to their valuable experience.
Yeah.
Just from talking to so many people, it's like overwhelmingly that's the vibe that I get. Some people too much so, right? Like they give too much of themselves and they start wearing thin.
Right. Balance is important. But that's so true. Like when I started, because I thought about doing my interview show for 6 months, almost a year. I think I was talking about it. And then finally I was like, you know what? I'm gonna put some cash out. I'm gonna buy equipment and like pay for a subscription. So then I feel like the pinch of having spent money and having to show something for it. But I was like, man, no one's gonna want to be on the show. I don't know anyone. I have no Twitter followers, blah, blah, blah. But so many people I reached out to were like, oh yeah, sure, that sounds super fun. And like, and some people that had they known the downloads that I had at the time, like would never have come on the show, but they were super cool. And then about 8 months in, I guess, yeah, because we were mid-pandemic, people had started doing a bunch of these charity streams, right? Which is super cool. Like, I think that's such a cool kind of superpower of the tabletop community, is like so many people have causes they care about and are willing to put time and effort into raising money for them, and people are willing to show up and donate money. Like if someone ever did a study on how much money tabletop gaming has raised in the past year, the number would be huge. But I decided, you know what, I'll try one of these charity streams. So I reached out to a bunch of different guests on my show that felt like a huge long shot. People like Brian Foster and Jenny D and Adam Bradford and then Jelly Bamani and people that are, legit people in the industry. And I was like, they'll all tell me no. And they were like, yeah, sure, that sounds great. Let's do a thing. And so we did a charity thing, raised a bunch of money, and it's all because people in this industry are super down to help each other, and it's pretty cool.
Yeah, I feel like too, like even more so if you attach a charity to it, like they become even more generous than they already were.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, that too. If it's less of a like, hey, come help me be bigger, and it's like, hey, you're bigger than me. What if we just raise money for people? Like, people are usually pretty down with that.
Which is awesome. I mean, like everyone's busy; they could easily say no, but they choose to say yes. So
yeah,
that's one of the great things about the industry. So, do you actually have time to play games?
Barely. Actually, we were pretty intentional. My D&D group is me, my wife, and our best friends, who are another couple. The husband DMs for us. And like when the pandemic hit, we were all pretty hardcore about quarantining. We were like, look, we're going to stay home and we will see you and no one else. Because one, we don't want to lose our minds not seeing anyone, but two, we want to keep playing D&D. So luckily we've had our game going throughout the pandemic. We probably play every couple of weeks. We just played this past weekend, so I still have time to do that. Starting my new show was kind of simultaneously an excuse to try something new, but also have regularly scheduled D&D as well. So I'm playing essentially in 2 regular games, and then I do a bunch of charity one shots. Probably do like 1 or 2 a month. So I'm probably playing more D&D right now than I ever have in my life. So it's not bad.
I know, like last Saturday, we got together virtually, and we're finally having the discussion of getting back together as a group and comparing vaccination dates. So, and the most of our group is vaccinated for that group anyway. Most of them are vaccinated, so probably not. And that's a monthly game, so not next month, but the following month.
Yeah,
everyone will have been vaccinated. The 2 weeks after have gone by, then we can go, spread our germs on each other once again, as D&D was meant to be played.
Right, just in close quarters, coughing on each other constantly, the way Gygax intended it.
The way Gygax intended it, for sure. So yeah, so that's pretty exciting. And the couple of other games that I'm involved with, it's like now we're getting to the point where we're also looking at, all right, who's got their jab, and we'll be back in person. So that feels good.
Yeah, I think I'm most excited, like personally, for and I'll apologize in advance. I think my 3-year-old has discovered the in the Hobbit movie, the Blunt the Knives song, where blunt the knives and bend the forks.
Yeah.
And she is outside and she just runs in circles singing it constantly. So
that's
you're
awesome.
going to hear her contribution. But I'm super excited for conventions, because I had only ever been to like one PAX prior to starting my show. And then I was going to go to Emerald City. I was going to go to GaryCon. I was going to go to Gen Con. I was going to do all of those before the pandemic hit. So that sucked, not getting to do that. But I'm excited to, everyone get vaccinated and go do conventions. I think right now I'm tentatively going to be at Gen Con with Dwarven Forge in the fall. We'll see. But I'm super pumped about that.
Yeah, I am. I'm looking longingly. I don't know what I'm going to do yet. I'm thinking PAX Unplugged for my first one back, because it's local for us.
Oh, yeah. And that won't be till like December, right?
Yeah, it's later. It's local. We can pop in. If we don't like the scene, if we leave, it's not a big deal. Usually it's pretty easy for us to get like media badges anyway. Not that matters anyway, because like the badges are always like the cheapest thing when going to a con anyway. Like, it's always the travel that gets you.
Yeah, that's for sure.
But so if you go to Gen Con with Dwarven Forge, you'll probably be able to stay like right there.
That's my assumption. That's my hope. Which is, because we'll have a booth and all that. Again, it all depends on how the world looks like. Yeah. It looks like here in the US we're doing pretty great on getting people vaccinated right now. So we'll just kind of play it by ear. But yeah, hopefully I'll be staying right there. and that
Yeah,
should be pretty cool.
I've been to Gen Con 3 times now, and the very first one, I'm like, hey, we're going to Gen Con, and you can have Nerdarchy sleep on your floor, and that actually worked. So we took us up on that offer.
The weirdest Kickstarter ever. Like,
Yeah.
At the $20 level, you can give us a sleeping bag. For $50, you can give us a mattress.
Yeah. But that was like 30 minutes out. So it's like you go, you're there pretty much all day. And then the next year we got closer. We got rooms that got closer. Still it's like you're gonna go there, and finding parking, that's a hassle. The last time we went, we actually were like right there within the hotel block, so you could just walk on over through the sky bridges and stuff, and you never even had to go outside, which that was pretty nice. I mean, especially for like Gen Con, you're there like you're there like 5 days, 6 days.
Sure, it's a long haul.
Yeah, and like sometimes you just need a break, and you want to just be like able to go back to your room or something and chill and decompress for a little bit. But if you're staying a half hour away, that becomes a bit tough.
You're like, am I willing to lose literally half the day, like going back, resting, coming back, paying for the transit? Yeah, that makes sense.
So, but Gen Con was actually my first convention ever. Gen Con 50.
Nice.
It was cool, and like I drove out with my son. I guess he was like 17, 18 at the time. I think, yeah, he was like 17, 18, drove out. We went and picked up Doug, who's our content director, and and went there. So it was pretty cool. It was like his first convention of mine. All of my like YouTuber friends were calling him Nerdarchy Jr. So I was like, I tried convincing him to get that Twitter handle, but he wasn't having it.
Man, missed opportunity.
I know. He's a filthy casual anyway.
You wouldn't want him to out himself publicly on social media as not actually being hardcore, not being full Nerdarchy, if you will.
Yeah. Well, with both you and your wife being gamers, how long before you try and indoctrinate your daughter?
Oh, it's already started. Like when she just turned 3 a couple weeks ago, and like because we were the ones with the young kid, our group would come over here to play for the first couple of years, and so if she wasn't napping, she was sitting in our lap, trying to hold our dice. And finally, I was like, this is driving me nuts. So I got her these like big foam, like D20, D10 was a full set, and so she would roll those on the floor. She loves like she'll see me on like Hero Forge or something, and she'll be like a D&D character, and she'll want to go make a D&D character. She has a box of Dwarven Forge that she builds with, like, and she says that she's playing D&D. And so, I mean, as soon as she can grasp like some basic rules, we're gonna play. And
that's some expensive Lincoln Logs there.
That is true. Yeah, that is true. Thank you. Shout out employee discount.
Yeah.
But even still, yeah, she does not know how spoiled she is.
Fortunately, it's made of Dwarvenite, the toughest.
Exactly. So theoretically indestructible. Yeah. But oh no, yeah. As soon as she, I think my friends started playing with their kids when they were around 6 with some really simplified rules. So that's kind of my that's what I got my eyes on. Start a little home game.
Yeah, I think Ted started. His daughter was like 4 or 5. But his son's a couple years older, and they started with No Thank You Evil. Which that one's
more basic systems.
Well, so it's Cypher System, kind of like dumbed down a little bit, but because Cypher System is a resource management and you have pools, No Thank You Evil comes with chits, right? So your pools are the chits, and like even like a child that can't even really count yet can still like see them and understand the pile going down or increasing.
Yeah. Like that's a visual concept you can grasp.
Yeah. And then the game itself is designed that you have your hero character and they all have like a pet, whether it's like a dinosaur or a dragon or a robot or something.
That's what my our friends have twins. The people in our group, I think they're like both 10 now or something. But that was immediately like when they started playing, like the second week after they started their home game with their kids, they were like, our daughter has 12 pets in this game. And every episode is her like, can I adopt this animal? Can I adopt? They've had to create homebrew rules around the amount of animals this kid can adopt, because she's like, oh, in this game I can do anything. I want a cat and a horse and an elephant and like whatever. So maybe they need to play in a system that just already predicates having an animal companion.
We played Perdition at Gen Con 50, and that's another game where it's like, I don't know, you remember Dino Riders?
Yeah, I think that is
It was a
ringing a bell.
cartoon where they were
Yes,
like
yeah.
dinosaurs and they mounted lasers on them and stuff, right?
There were a bunch of toys too, right?
Yes, there was
Okay.
definitely a bunch of toys.
Yeah.
And I was talking to, I don't know if it was Shannon or if it was Monty Cook, and I'm like, we're talking about that. I'm like, you guys made Dino Riders. Like, it is essentially what you did. And so we played like a demo game, and my son was excited because he's like, I don't care what character I play because I have a bunch of pre-gens. I just want the one with the Ankylosaurus. And so I was like, cool. And he got the one with the Ankylosaurus. So we got our characters, we got our dinosaurs. And they're like, all right, take your dinosaur and pass it to the person to the left. They will actually be playing your dinosaur.
Did he start crying immediately?
Just watch his face drop. Yeah, 17-year-old kid start crying. So yeah, they that's definitely a thing, and I don't think it's just like kids either. Like a lot of more modern gamers are all about the pets.
It's just not like, I don't know, like it's just not a thing. I love animals, but like I will never play any sort of class or wizard or whatever. I will never use like find familiar or anything like that, just because it bugs me having to manage like an additional thing. Like I won't pick a class that lets you create a duplicate and then you have to roll for your duplicate. I'm like, nope, that's more than I want to handle right now. Just like I don't want to have to be like, all right, well, my rat can run 50 feet and what can it see? But some people are super into that. So that's what's cool about the game, or any of these games, right? You can play them how you want in the way that fits you.
We're playing a Ravenloft game on Saturdays, and the DM was a player and they took over. They had a familiar that was an owl. But I guess like we leveled up, or soon after we got there to Ravenloft, we leveled up, and the ranger became a beastmaster and took the wizard's familiar as their companion that wasn't in the game anymore. And it's funny because like literally the ranger is an arrow croaker that stores the the beast companion in their armpit and takes it out like once in a while. Like gets no use whatsoever. Like it might as well just be like dead class features.
Right.
But awesome. Yeah. And also like 5e's kind of gotten away from pet classes as well. Or at least, initially they tried making it more painful to use them.
Sure. I think it's interesting, and now we're full on nerd, which makes sense for the channel, so it totally works. Yeah. Like I think it's interesting. Like I've known a lot of people who play paladins who make that become a bit of a pet class with like find greater steed, and then like I'm like, look, your horse doesn't have to be everywhere, man. Like just chill out for a bit. But they're super into that awesome horse they found, so more power to you.
Yeah, I ran a stream game for just over a year, and the paladin definitely had a mount that was like that. Arun was the name of the mount. I think it was like Anarok. I'm probably not saying that right, but the orc oxen from one of the books. And like they would equip this steed with all kinds of like, they basically bedazzled it. And
as one does.
Yeah, as one does. And every time they dismissed it, all the trinkets and everything would just fall to the ground.
Down, yeah.
and it wouldn't want to do anything until it got its adornments back. And they eventually even equipped it with a headband of blasting.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Well, a paladin steed is like a 6 intelligence. That's only slightly dumber than the barbarian.
Right. Just throw that blasting band on it. That's nice. That's fun. You know what? I like fun stuff like that. That would sell me on having some pets more if I weaponized them a bit.
It's like three extra attunement slots.
Oh, boom! There you go.
That you wouldn't normally get. So yeah, I don't mind. Like, I don't mind it. I'm not like a big pet player myself. Although it can be fun too. Like it just gives you like I played a Beastmaster companion with a or Ranger Beastmaster with a giant crab companion, and I feel like people like the crab better than they like the character.
I feel like you need a group that, like, with good group synergy, that that can do that can also be excited about like whatever creature you're bringing in, so it's not just your thing where people are like, all
Yeah,
right, they're feeding the dog, but when it's like everyone embraces like the other person's character elements, I think it makes it easier and more fun, because I've certainly played in games before where it's like, okay, like, we get it, you have an animal, we
yeah.
don't have to make this whole session about like you finding a special collar like for your animal or whatever, right? So
That's why like they got nerfed in 5e because we a lot of us play 3 with any of the pet classes where it's like, oh look, it's the summoner's turn. I guess we can all go get dinner now and come back in an hour when they're done.
yeah,
Yeah, but I feel like games are a lot more narrative, so like that matters less.
sure.
You know? I don't know if you've had that. If you feel like games are more narrative now than when you first started playing.
Well, so I tell people that I grew up D&D adjacent for a long time, because I read like Forgotten Realms were some of the first like the Drizzt books were some of the first like fantasy books I read, and all this stuff, and super into Dragonlance, and never realized any of those were D&D properties. I didn't start playing D&D until I don't know, about 5 years ago. So I'm 5e only is the only system I've played in the D&D world. So all I know is narrative, but I hear it used to be less so.
Yeah, yeah. That uh, so that also speaks to another direction that I've noticed in the hobby as well is people jumping in, and being new or relatively new and going like full throttle. Like, so you're playing D&D for like 4 years and boom, podcast, right? Or yeah,
Right.
so and which I love because people are getting really involved and becoming not just gamers but ambassadors to the hobby and the industry.
Well, I think it's fairly unique in industries, because I mean, think of anything else you become a fan of. So I'm a huge Star Wars fan. I've got Star Wars stuff all over my office. And I could go and start a Star Wars podcast, but like I don't know, there are not too many fandoms that you can go and like express yourself creatively or even like financially in a business sense, casually, right? Because D&D is a game, and you can play this game, you can stream it, you can one of my friends has a big nerdy coffee company, you can paint, you can draw, you can basically anything that you do in a business, you can put a D&D theme around. And I don't know, it's just because naturally it's a framework for telling stories, it just creates more opportunities for people to jump in and express themselves individually through that specific through that game. And so I don't know, I think it's very unique in that sense. And I think 5e coming out at the time it did, Critical Role switching to it, like, can you imagine, by the way, I feel so bad for Paizo, can you imagine if Critical Role had stuck with Pathfinder, like, versus playing 5e? Like, what would the gaming landscape look like right now? That's a thought experiment I like to play. but
Yeah,
but I
it's
think
definitely a missed opportunity. And honestly, they were really like Paizo in general was just really late to getting streamers involved in their
right.
product. I I remember I don't know if there's any correlation, but I had Owen Stevens on, and it was there was streamers Dragon and Things, maybe Dragons and Stuff now. Like they had to change their name for whatever reason. But they were like streaming to like Facebook, and they had like a studio on his Pathfinder.
Yeah.
And when I had Steven Owens on a few years ago, I'm like, why aren't you guys connected with them? Why isn't Paizo talking to these people that are playing their games? I mean, it doesn't make any sense. You should support them because they're the ambassadors for your company.
Right.
You know?
The only reason I started playing D&D was because our friends that we played board games with, we kind of lured them into the idea. Like we'd been playing some tabletop games that had like role play elements. There was some dice rolling, there was some fighting mechanics, and we were kind of like, hey, what if we played some D&D? And they're like, well, we'll try it, but don't tell people. We don't want to tell anyone. and I was like, okay, don't worry about it. I'll go figure it out. You don't have to do anything. Like I'll go find a system. I'll run the game. Like you can pretend they called it football for the longest time. They were like, oh, we're going to get together and watch some football this weekend. I was like, yeah, we'll watch some football. But so I went online 2015, 2016, trying to figure out what system we were going to play. And there were some articles because I guess 5th edition had just come out and people were like, do you want to play Pathfinder? Or do you want to play 5th edition? And I knew nothing. It was purely the fact that in trying to figure out how to play, I came across videos of Critical Role playing, and they were not huge at that time, right? Like 5 years ago or whatever. They were growing, but they were still early Geek and Sundry. But because there was content out there and there was even stuff on Wizard's site that connected to people streaming, so I could go watch them play to get a sense of what my game could be like, that's essentially the only reason I chose to play D&D. And so I wonder if Paizo had more of a direct, kind of marketing intentionality behind supporting streamers. And I know 5 years ago was early, but even at that time, like I think that would have and probably still continues to majorly sway people to what system they end up playing, because it's so much easier to see someone else doing something and get an idea of what it could be like for you versus like spend the money and time on books to hope you have a good time. So I think you're right.
That is the benefit of being an early adopter, right? It's being out in front and kind of seeing what's going on. Like I follow Gary Vee from time to time, and that's like one of his big claims to fame.
Yeah,
seeing kind of reading the tea leaves and getting out in front of things. So I totally had a question and it fell out of my head.
That's my favorite thing when I do interviews. Like,
one of the funny things is you calling it football, because when we were in high school, several of my friends were all musicians. And we're all into like the metal scene and like everything. It's high school, so things are clicky, and we're all metalheads. So we would call it rocking out. And so people didn't know what we were doing, and like a lot of our early videos too, because like now it's not so bad, but like in the 80s and 90s, it was definitely not a cool thing to do. And I would rather have people think I was doing anything but. And you'd always look for clues, right? Like, oh, that guy's wearing a Starscream t-shirt, or something that's kind of nerdy to try and figure out if they're one of our people or not. And then it's like you feel like you're trying to do like shady drug deals, trying to score that D20. So it definitely brought back some memories. Did you like try and lure them towards D&D with like progressively giving them more tabletop games that would like steer in that direction?
100%. Like, because it was something that I was vaguely interested in, and my wife had even said like, do you want to play Dungeons and Dragons sometime? And I at the time would have said that I was nerdier than her, but she was her idea to start playing. But yeah, we played, it started like everybody, like we're going to play Catan and resource management games. And then we found this other game on Kickstarter called Time Stories. And we were like, oh, this is cool. There's some role-playing stuff here. And the way Time Stories works is it was a modular game, like a legacy game. So you would tear stuff up while you played, and new modules came out like every 6 months. So it became a big deal for our group, right? And we reached the point where we were dressing up, we had music on, we were making like themed food. And I was like, we just need to, at this point, we just need to call a spade and play Dungeons and Dragons. So it's definitely an
and your friend was worried about people knowing they played D&D.
Right. In like full costume with like, Egyptian music on. He's like, what? We're not nerds. What are you talking about? I'm like, yeah. First hit's free, and then you just keep giving them a little bit more, and now they're all the way in.
Yes, a little denial going on there.
Yeah. But it was funny because even early on, right? Like my mother-in-law, who's a super fantastic woman, when we first started playing, we'd be like, yeah, we're gonna go play Dungeons and Dragons, and we would come back and we'd see her, and she'd be like, oh, did you all win? And I was like,
yeah.
I guess. And now she totally gets what we're doing because she babysits while we do our stream game and all that. But like it's been an education for the people and family around us because it's become such a big part of our lives now. I mean, it's literally my job at this point. So
yeah. Crazy. Well, that is also like a huge pivot too. Like I've talked about it on the streams before, but for me, even after doing Nerdarchy for a while, I still wasn't really telling people about D&D and what I would spend my weekends doing.
Yeah.
It wasn't until we started doing YouTube for a while and Nerdarchy for a while, we started generating revenue, and I was getting closer and closer to the point where somebody was going to choose to leave their job and dedicate their time to this. What I found was, once you can tell people, like, I make money doing this thing, like, they don't actually care about the thing anymore. They're like, wait, what they can grasp is, you like a thing, you do that, and people give you money for it. It totally changes the conversation. The thing could be the weirdest thing in the world at this point, and nobody ever cares anymore, because they can just equate it to what are the things that they like doing, and if they could just do whatever they wanted with their time and make that a career. So that was a turning point for me. Now I have my car that has, like, nerdarchy.com down either side, and this huge goblin with a bomb with the Nerdarchy logo on it on the hood. So
that's awesome. That's pretty great.
Come a long way. I mean, and for most of my life, I worked in and around construction. So it's definitely not your typical gamer. I mean, at this point, I've met people from all walks of life that game, but I just remember leaving work when I worked at, like, a lumber yard, and people were like, "What are you doing this weekend?" I'm like, I would tell them anything but playing Dungeons and Dragons, like I do every single Saturday night.
Right.
It would be much better if they thought, I would much prefer if they thought I was snorting blow off a hooker's ass than rolling these, funny shaped dice.
Right. Oh man.
So
that's funny. I am curious, like, but a big part of me wishes I'd been playing longer. I'm very happy I came to, like, the game when I did, but, like, I also, I grew up homeschooled in the South. So about as, like, against magic-y things, like, we weren't allowed to watch Pokemon growing up. So that probably helped keep me. But Lord of the Rings was totally fine. Lord of the Rings and Chronicles of Narnia, sure, just don't do anything with literally any other magic. But I kind of wish that I had a bit of the experience of that, like, latent satanic panic stuff, just so I could, like, look back and have that contrast. Because for me, I'm like, oh no, this has always been cool because I've only been doing it for 5 years. But people have such interesting stories of, especially when you talk to, like, vampire players, like people who were super into vampire in the 90s, and had, like, a very kind of, like, counterculture experience with that. It's just a whole different, life experience that I don't have to share with people.
I guess, like, we like to talk about it because that's our experience, but at the same time, there was a lot of bad things about it that were just kind of cruddy, because, like, your experience is like, oh, I'm thinking about doing a thing. Let me go look at that first and see if I really want to do it. Like, when I came to the hobby, it was like, my neighbor came over. He's a little bit older, and he had the red box. He's like, oh, and we're looking at that. And then he took me to his friend's house, and we made characters and played, Gamma World. And then, I wouldn't touch it for a few more years, and I would start playing AD&D. But in all those instances, it was like, essentially, like, someone older than you would introduce you to the game, and that's how you would learn to play the game. And if they were kind of shitty at the game, well, that was going to be your experience with the game, and that was going to be what you would carry forward. I was very lucky because I had gotten introduced to it by someone that was actually a really good GM back then, and in the very beginning, it wasn't that narrative driven, but they were trying to steer us in that direction, because they were like, I think when we started playing, they were like 17, 18-ish, and we were all like, 13, 12, around that age, because it was one of our friends' older brother who would sometimes play backyard sports with us. So I think it was literally like after a game of Run the Bases or something that he was like, hey, you guys want to check out this game? And I may have even been like the only one who heard of it out of our group, because I had that earlier exposure.
Sure.
But because he was like so much older than us, he was like the cool kid. But then in hindsight, not really. Um, and so that was like my experience with it. And then and I would play for a few years and then stop until my early 20s when we started a group again. And, like that group was probably like the impetus for Nerdarchy to kind of begin, because the 4 members that were kind of the founding members of Nerdarchy all came from that group.
Gotcha.
So I don't know. Like, I think people now have such a better way to come up into the hobby.
Yeah, for sure.
About it. Because there's also a lot of like horror stories that I've heard that people now they can have comparisons and be like, oh, this isn't how it's supposed to be, and they can just move on.
Right. Yeah. There's no actual, these days there's very little actual like bullying or abuse just simply for being interested or playing. Yeah. Like, no, you can dress up as your character now and make money doing it. Like, crazy.
It's definitely got much cooler.
Yeah.
So who's going to be on Roll Persuasion next?
So episode dropping today. It was my last streamed episode, but the podcast is dropping today. Anthony Rapp, star of Rent, and he's on Star Trek Discovery. He was on the show. He's gotten super into D&D over the pandemic, and so it was fun to chat with him. We're actually going to be playing in a game, me and him, for the Charity Jaspers Game Day.
Yeah.
In a couple weeks. Deborah Ann Wohl is going to run that game, and so I'm not entirely certain how I got into it, but I'm very glad to be there.
Oh, that's super cool.
Yeah. So, that's what's cool about like meeting people and networking, because I just reached out to Anthony, who is someone that I grew up as a musical theater fan, just very much loving. And so I was just like, oh, I'll randomly tag this person on Twitter, and he was like, yeah, sure, I'll be on your show. I was like, what? Say what now? But I introduced him to Jaspers, and we set up a game, and then Deborah became the DM. So that's going to be super cool. But he will be this week. Next week, B. Dave Walters is going to be the episode. And then someone from Dungeon Run in a couple of weeks. I don't remember which. I think Ron Ogden, who's on the Dungeon Run show. Y'all should check that out. He'll be in a few weeks. And then after that, I should probably book more people. So
that was our David Harbour story.
Yeah.
I was super surprised, because I did just that. I tweeted at him. I had learned that he had used to play D&D, or had played D&D, and he's like, sure. He's like, I'll give you guys 20 minutes, and he stayed for 40. So I was like, yes, we made it past the ripcord.
That's awesome. Like, and I think I've watched the video. That was a few years ago, right?
Yeah,
like,
it was a couple years ago. Yeah.
Yeah. So my chances of tweeting at him now and getting that same interview probably more slim.
Well, yeah, timing is everything.
Oh, for sure. And that was the interesting thing about Anthony, is I reached out to him. If you follow Anthony on Twitter now, and I don't know, he's got like 200,000 followers. He's a big deal, but almost all he's tweeting about is D&D. But a couple months ago, he wasn't tweeting about D&D at all. I happened to see it in a comment reply he sent to someone. I was like, you play D&D? But now, like, he's totally into that. He's in all these games now. So if I hadn't hit him up when I did, I very much doubt that I would have been able to make that connection. So yeah, timing is super everything.
Yeah. We had David Harbour on. He had done the first season of Stranger Things, and it was just prior to getting the Hellboy role.
Okay.
So yeah, super lucky.
It's interesting for me, and hopefully I'm not jinxing myself by calling my own shot, but a couple weeks before they told me that Deborah was going to DM the game I'm playing, and I tweeted out like, I'm very big in like about like life planning and kind of like, naming and claiming or whatever, like this is the goal I'm going to achieve, and then mentally figuring out the steps. And I'd done that very well at this point with the show. And I was just like, people I want to have on my show this year. And I think it was Stephen Colbert, which is not going to happen, but I'll put it out there. Deborah Ann Wohl, and now I feel bad because I don't remember, probably like Joe Manganiello or someone.
Yeah.
And then like a couple weeks later, they're like, oh, you're going to play in a game with Deborah. I was like, the universe is listening.
Yeah.
It's all coming true, baby.
I've been heard.
So we'll see. Maybe we'll get her on the show. That'd be pretty cool.
Nice. That is super cool. And it's also like, that's another thing about being a gamer now is like all of these celebrities are coming out, as gaming. Which I mean, and honestly, like it seems surprising, but at the same time, not really. Because if you think about it, like when when we first started our game, that kind of like became like our core group in my early 20s, it was like I was playing with like high school kids, college kids, um, and they're like all larpers and theater kids. So like it only makes sense that those people would end up, a certain percentage of those people would end up eventually someday being doing their craft and professionally, and
Right.
they were already introduced to the game. So
Right. I mean, especially, so many of these, celebrities or performers were theater kids, right? And in those kind of nerdy pursuits already. I think it's interesting that you see a lot of screenwriters and a lot of directors who've all played D&D growing up, and I think again it goes back to the fact that it is like, I think at its core, and again I didn't play early editions, but at its core, even early on, it was a way to tell stories. And so, you had these people who early on knew they wanted to tell stories, but, didn't know how to write movies yet or, produce film. And so that was kind of the way for them to kind of flex those muscles early on. And now they're doing it professionally and they're like, oh yeah, D&D was a huge influence and I can talk about it now. So very true.
even even when the game was less narratively driven, it was still a game about stories. They might not have been good stories, right? But it was still there at the core. So I feel like that connection, that draw would be there. And, it did progress.
Sure.
And,
It was a way
even,
to be a hero, right? Which
yeah.
is the gateway drug to telling the story of being a hero.
And even in our own group, like, even though we didn't really pay attention to the internet and what was going on online, we still got more narrative with our games over time just naturally. Uh, and then, you know, once we started paying attention online, what it did was give us a lot more tools in our toolbox to use.
Yeah.
And, like to us, a lot there terms like a social contract and, session zero were non existent at our tables,
Sure.
before 2014. But like we quickly adopted these ideas and these concepts, and they just made sense.
Yeah. And I think, I know a lot of people, and I'm sure this is a pushback on kind of like the some of the old timer whatever things who are like, no, you kids these days just want to be unicorns or whatever. There's a lot of like anti min maxing narrative, I think, in the TTRPG space. And like, no, it's about telling stories and having fun. And like, if you're there just because you want to, go play video games, if you just want to hack and slash and beat stuff up. And I don't agree with that, because I love the idea of playing like a purely mechanical D&D game. I haven't yet, but we're
Right.
all just like optimized as hell. We're there to dungeon crawl. We want to get loot and beat stuff up. And it's cool because you can do that. You can do both.
It's
Like,
just
and there's
another
room
aspect of
for
the
it.
game.
Yeah.
Yeah, like like in the earliest of my gaming that I remember is like you would show up at the doors of the dungeon. You would go into the dungeon, right? Like town did not play into it very much at all. Um, maybe you would to hire someone to identify magic items or to sell off your stuff, but the focus wasn't on that stuff that was outside of the dungeon.
Yeah.
Uh, but now, now as we get older, like we just did a video last week about dungeon, there not being as many dungeons in Dungeons and Dragons for us anyway. Obviously, if you're playing the official stuff, there's plenty of dungeons still in there. But I feel like a lot of the games that are being run nowadays that are, primarily homebrew or streamed, you see a lot less of that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, especially streamed, right? Just because like, I don't know, and that's that balance that I talk to people about who are talking about starting stream games. I'm like, okay, what is fun at your table versus what is fun for people to watch?
Yeah.
Like, and some people might enjoy seeing you go into every room, check under every bed, open every chest, loot every body, but you just spent half an hour in one room checking every body. Like, that's not we're outside the realms of entertainment now. So yeah, it makes sense that stream games especially would kind of push away from that. I think I don't know if I've ever actually encountered a dragon in a game of Dungeons and Dragons in the last like 5 years. Outside of like a one shot where it's like, oh, here's a dragon, but it's easy to beat. Like, it's been a very small number. It's more like dungeons and, you know, what's the biggest thing? Like Displacer
Shopkeepers.
Beast or something. I don't know.
Yeah, we play one stream game on this channel called Dungeons and Delving. We've got like a couple more sessions left of that, and it's a game show. It's supposed to be set like in the future, but teams do these dungeon runs where they score points on how fast they can get through it, um, and by people calling in to vote for their favorite team. So like one episode is what happens between the dungeon runs, and the other is the dungeon runs. And even like the dungeon runs are like maybe a fight or two, or some puzzles or some traps. But it's actually very dungeon light.
I like the idea of it. Maybe I'm giving a good idea away. If you like this idea, take it and run with it, because I don't have the energy to do it. But I like the idea of a D&D stream that is done kind of like pro wrestling, where like almost like it's like each week is like a pro wrestling episode where you have a few different fights, but then a lot of it is like the promotion and like the dynamics behind the scenes. So I feel like somebody needs to do like medieval, like fighting league.
That's kind of what the Dungeons and Delving show is.
There you go. Perfect.
Kind of like, because basically you have the quad or living space, right, where there's a subplot going on amongst that, but there's also like the contention between all the different contestants that are in the show that are trying to win, and we do like what we just call asides, where one player just kind of takes narrative control and is like almost like the confession booth style video from like reality TV shows.
Yeah.
So we get a little bit of that in there. Ted had pitched the game to us, and I was like, this exists because in one of the D20 systems had made a game called Dungeon Crawl. Goodman Games, I believe, is they put it out. He ended up picking it up afterwards. I'm like, you just reinvented Dungeon Crawl. Or no, is it X Crawl? It might be X Crawl.
Okay.
But there's a game out there that kind of does that. And it's just a fun way for us to be like goofy with D&D.
Yeah, and that's it's all about having fun at the end of the day. So whatever you do to have fun, go for it.
So, and I think there is actually a couple different wrestling games.
Decent. Just that's what Critical Role should do next. Just forget Mercer's whole homebrew. They just need to do like a full wrestling takeoff. I would watch that. I would subscribe.
Well, so in the 80s, the Marvel Superheroes RPG came out, and we actually didn't play very much of the actual game, other than we would just have wrestling matches. I forget what the Marvel Wrestling Federation was. With we would just pick characters and fight. But yeah, teen angst. So who is your like? Who's the one person above all other you would like to get on your show?
That's a hard question, and that's what I was kind of saying about like speaking to the universe. Because when I started the show, I was like, all right, what are my X number of goals? I want to win an Emmy at Gen Con. I want to get Brian W. Foster on because he did a Critical Role show called Between the Sheets. It was really like inspirational to me as far as like interview styling. Yeah. I want to do X number of downloads, blah blah blah. And a month into the show, I got Brian Foster on through just like sheer accident. I was like, oh well, I thought he was the dream guest, but I already did that, so I need.
You reached the pinnacle.
Yeah, so I should just quit. 8 episodes in, show over. I don't know, like. And here's what's funny is that like sometimes I've had guests on because I try to do a good mix of like quote unquote like celebrity, one because they're hard to get, and just like people that I think are doing cool stuff in the community. And I'm sometimes surprised by some of the people I have on and just how much I resonate with like their stories and what they're doing, and how they're some of now my favorite interviews I've done. I think Colbert would be pretty fantastic to chat with, just because he's an entertaining person. And I'm interested in not just, his D&D background and love of nerdy stuff, but just his path through the entertainment industry. I think that would be really entertaining for me. I think he'd probably be at the top if I was being purely selfish. And this has nothing to do with Dungeons and Dragons. But did you ever watch the Late Late Show with Craig Ferguson
Not
back in the
really.
day? Okay, Craig Ferguson, Scottish dude, he'd been on the Drew Carey Show. He did the Late Late Show on CBS in the early 2000s. Just someone that I like look up to in his craft for so many ways. Go just search Craig Ferguson on YouTube. One of
I
the
think I've
best
seen
interviewers
clips.
I've ever seen. I think he's fantastic. It would have nothing to do with nerdy stuff, but I would love to have him on as an entertainment person someday, just to chat with.
How much prep do you put into your interviews?
And it's funny that you ask, because one of the reasons I love Craig Ferguson is that, on late night shows, Letterman or whatever, they have the blue cards that have kind of all the pre-approved questions for their guests that they kind of go through, and they're like, oh, you're here to talk about XYZ. Before every episode, and it was funny early on before guests knew to expect this, but Craig would like rip those cards up in front of the guests and just kind of throw them away. And they would just chat about the dumbest, most random stuff. But that's what made the interviews good. So that and my laziness was kind of like my own approach to doing the interviews. I was like, man, I did the first couple and I had prep questions and it felt so forced. And I felt so nervous because I was like too busy thinking about the next question to listen and have a genuine interaction. So, I mean, at this point, I don't prep at all, like at all. Especially because I've done like, 70, 80 episodes or whatever at this point. Like, I know what to expect. And I'd rather do what you and I are doing right now. We're just talking. And I think that's way more entertaining than like, how did you get into D&D? What was your first character? Tell me, people resonate, I think, with genuineness more than they do with like really polished questions. So yeah, that's a long way to say I don't prep at all.
Yeah.
Same way I DM.
I get the question a lot. What are we going to talk about? And I was like, I don't know, whatever. I'll ask you about what you do, and we'll see where it goes from there. The chat might ask us some questions.
Yeah.
And by the way, if you show up with a weird pet in the background or something, we're not going to talk about any of that. I'm just going to talk about your pet for the rest of the show.
I made like a segment for my show, just for like my Patreon supporters, that was literally there just to indulge things like that. I was like, we always end up talking about nerdy things or D&D. Like, I want 15 minutes where I want you to just tell me about something that you're super into that's totally random. Margaret Weiss was on, and she apparently raises dogs for some sort of weird like dog racing thing that I'd never heard of. And I saw one of her dogs in the background. I was like, tell me about that. And so, yeah, I have a whole segment dedicated to like whatever random thing I see in the back of your Zoom window.
I had Holly Conrad on a couple times, and she like rescues pigeons or does something with pigeons, right?
Okay.
I'm like, I talk about D&D all the time, but when do I get to talk about pigeons?
Exactly.
Do I care about pigeons? No, but I think it's really interesting that you do.
That's it. That is it. 100%. Yeah.
Yeah. So we are just past the hour mark. Final thoughts before we head on out.
Man, final thoughts. I just really appreciate you having me on. It's been it hasn't felt like an hour. It's gone by so quickly. It's just fun to chat. That's the whole reason. One of the reasons I do my own show is just to get to chat and meet cool people. So glad we got to do it.
Yeah.
We'll have to do it in opposite. You'll have to now come on my show.
And I would love to.
We'll just do this whole conversation again.
Yeah, basically. We can bring Ted along or something as well. Yeah. So with that, thanks for coming on. I really appreciate it, Andrew. As always, links are in the description. Go check them out. And until next time, stay nerdy.